I've got to be honest here, I love Porter's 5 Forces. This is some of the most valuable and helpful strategic business planning content you can possibly find. I remember sitting in business meetings in a Fortune 500 company, and we were specifically talking about Porter's 5 Forces and how we could apply these principles to make our company stronger. It doesn't matter what company you are in. You could be a sole proprietor with a single person or a multinational corporation with 1 million employees. Porter's 5 Forces is relevant to you and to your company, and an understanding of this can help to make your company stronger. So what is Porter's 5 Forces? Porter's 5 Forces is a framework that companies can use to analyze their external environment, things outside of the company that they really can't specifically control. But of course, understanding the outside world and the external environment can help them with their planning. So this framework features 5 key components that contribute to a company's understanding of its environment and also of the company's profit-making potential within its industry. So this is Michael Porter. Michael Porter is a strategy professor, has been a strategy professor at Harvard Business School for a long time. He published The 5 Competitive Forces That Shape Strategy in 1979, and it has been a cornerstone of business education for decades. Understanding how each of these 5 forces contribute to the potential success of your company is really helpful to understand your industry and to build on or to create strategies that will help your company to succeed. So let's go ahead and jump right in and look at the 5 forces. So you'll see here that there are 4 on the outside and 1 kind of in the middle. And I think you'll kind of see why it's often shown this way. So over there on the left, we have the bargaining power of suppliers. And then on the right, the bargaining power of buyers. Above, you'll see the threat of new entrants, and at the bottom, the threat of substitute products. When you understand all of these, you kind of understand that most of your rivals or your competitors are going to be dealing with the same things. So rivalry among competing firms is there in the middle. So when you are analyzing Porter's 5 Forces or doing a Porter's 5 Forces analysis for any company, it's important to realize that that is specific to that company. Each company within an industry would come to different conclusions based on what they see in the industry. We're going to talk about why Porter's 5 Forces analysis needs to be done specifically for a particular company and not for the industry as a whole. And this comes down to perspective. So if you are looking at a company or at an industry, it's going to look different from the standpoint of each specific company. As an illustration of this, I want to talk about the Grand Canyon and how we might view it. So if you go to the south rim of the Grand Canyon, where really most tourists go, you'll get a view that looks something like this. But if you were to go to the north rim of the Grand Canyon, you're looking at the same canyon. And yet you'll see here that the view is different. Now think about those who go on vacation to go rafting down the Colorado River through the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You have a different view depending on where you are. And the same goes for companies within an industry. We're going to talk about Delta Airlines and Frontier Airlines. They're both in the airline business, but the view of the industry is going to look very different from the perspective of either one of them. So to help illustrate how the industry could look very different between Delta and Frontier, I looked out at a flight several months from now from Las Vegas to Atlanta, 2 major airports. A lot of airlines fly between these. And I just looked at the price among different airlines. I just looked at Google Flights. So on Frontier, this particular round-trip flight was $199. Spirit was charging $300 and JetBlue $328. But Delta was charging $418. Now these were for the same dates between the same cities. So why would we see something look so different? Why is competition so different if you're flying really fairly similar planes between the same cities? Well, for one, the strategy is different. Frontier Airlines only includes your seat and a personal item, a backpack, or something small that you can put under the seat in front of you. Delta was including a carry-on with that. Another important consideration is that the Delta seats are farther apart. They're more comfortable seats. People are willing to pay for more comfortable seats. Delta and Frontier Airlines have different strategies. They view the industry differently, and they're designed to create value for customers in different ways. And a lot of this has to do with where each of them fits within the industry. Their interaction with suppliers and buyers is going to be different. Their view of rivals and even the locations of their rivals are different. Delta, of course, has rivals in other countries where Frontier really doesn't have very much, other than just a few flights out of the US to places nearby. It's like one of them is on the south rim of the Grand Canyon and the other one is down at the very bottom of the Grand Canyon. They have vastly different views of the airline industry. So back to the 5 forces. Again, here is just a visual of what this looks like. And we're going to start off with the bargaining power of suppliers. First of all, strong suppliers can negotiate in their best interest. Maybe they can raise prices on their buyers. They can charge more and the buyers have to pay it. They might also reduce the size or the quality of things. Just a few examples of this. We have seen what's actually called shrinkflation, where companies are selling something that's smaller for the same price. So we can see that with boxes of cereal, where the family size is smaller than it used to be, but being sold at the same price. Kleenex is giving you fewer tissues per box, or Gatorade is giving you a smaller bottle, and yet it's coming for the same price. These suppliers have the ability to provide you with less for the same price because they are in a strong position. The same thing can happen with industrial companies. You might have companies that provide lower quality oil or agricultural products or lumber, and they're able to do this, or they want to do this, because it saves them money to be able to sell lower quality and pass on whatever might not be quite as good. Suppliers are strong when a few large companies dominate the industry. Think, for example, of computer processors. Well, if you have a computer, well, you're on a computer right now, you're probably using either an Intel or an AMD processor. These two companies have a lot of bargaining power within the industry, because if you don't choose one, you have to choose the other. Suppliers are also strong when there aren't very many alternatives for their customers. If you're operating a fleet of diesel, semi-trucks, and the price goes up, what are you going to do? Well, you're still going to pay the price at the pump, because that's the only way that you can stay in business. They essentially can raise the prices, and the drivers will continue to do that, at least for a while. We can also see the same thing when the buyer relies on that supplier for their success. If you were operating an online retail business and you were doing your sales and having your fulfillment done by Amazon, what are you going to do if Amazon suddenly changes their terms, or if they decide that they don't want you there? In that situation, you rely on Amazon, and you are going to have to do whatever they say because you don't really have a choice. You rely on their service. Another consideration that can make suppliers very strong is if those suppliers could become a competitor to their buyers. For example, if you are a baker and you're buying flour from somebody who mills that flour, could that miller decide to start baking bread? If they could move forward and become a competitor by selling or doing whatever it is that you're doing with what you buy from them, they're in a really strong negotiating position. You don't want them to become a new competitor, and so you're likely to work with what they want. Now let's talk about the bargaining power of buyers. Buyers want to buy products at a low cost that are high quality, and strong buyers are able to demand that better than others. Let's think about one of the strongest buyers in the world, and that's Walmart. When Walmart goes to a supplier and says, hey, we want to buy so many millions of dollars worth of your product, and this is the price we're going to pay, it's hard to negotiate back. The volume is so high, they're such a strong buyer that their bargaining power is very strong. Buyers are particularly strong when they buy in large volume, Again, think of a company like Walmart or Costco or Amazon that buy huge volumes of a lot of the products that they buy and sell. Their strength and their size gives them very strong bargaining power. Buyers are also strong when suppliers rely on one or just a couple or just a low number of buyers for a significant portion of their annual revenue. Buyers are also in a very strong position if they could easily switch to another supplier. If you are replaceable as a supplier, you don't have a lot of negotiating power. Your buyer does. Something that helps you to be replaceable as a supplier for a buyer is if the product is standardized. Buyers of standardized products are in a stronger buying position or stronger negotiating position. Think about products where it really doesn't matter which brand you buy. You probably can't tell the difference between C&H sugar or Great Value brand sugar once you get it out of the package and can't see the logo anymore. It's the same product. Other commodities include gasoline, many computer chips such as computer memory chips, or steel. It doesn't really matter which company you buy from, it's probably going to work just fine. And so those buyers of commoditized or standardized products can put themselves in a strong negotiating position. Buyers are also strong if they could become competitors to their suppliers. Could the baker start milling their own flour or something like that? That gives the buyer additional bargaining power if they don't like the terms that they're getting from their suppliers. Now let's talk about the threat of new entrants. When new companies come into an industry, they start to take market share and ultimately profits from the established companies. If you are an established company, you don't want new competitors to come into the industry. So let's talk about a couple of industries and just contrast how easy it would be to get in. I could start a window washing business tomorrow. I've actually done it before. It's part of how I paid my way through school. I could start that company. All I need is a few simple supplies, a little bit of equipment, and a business license, and I'm off washing windows, ready to go really quick. But I can't start an airline. I don't have what it takes to start an airline. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the access to the money to buy planes that are tens of millions of dollars. I don't have access to gates at airports. I don't have the government approval. I don't have pilots and flight attendants. To start that kind of a business is really difficult, even for people in the industry. David Neeleman is actually someone who has started multiple airlines such as JetBlue that you're probably familiar with. His recent or most recent company that he started took years in the process from when they first started working on it until they were actually flying planes and taking passengers places. The barriers to entry in the airline business are extremely high. It's hard to get started. Completely different than my experience washing windows, where I could start very easily and very quickly. To determine how high the threat of new entrants really is, there are a couple of things that we can look at. One of them is, can companies actually make money? If everybody in the industry is making a ton of money, well, even if it's difficult to get in, it would be attractive to get in because companies would want to get into that profit-making potential. In the early 2000s, there were just a few companies that had started making flash memory. It was expensive, took billions of dollars to get started, but those that were not in that industry, there were some companies that wanted to get in. Intel and Micron actually worked together to get into that. They worked together in a joint venture to overcome some of those entry barriers because the profit-making potential was so high. Contrast that, again, with computer memory, but with DRAM, it's kind of the old standard computer memory. In 2008, all of the computer memory companies were struggling. Everybody was losing money in the recession. It was really bad. Nobody would have wanted to start a computer memory company in that situation. It would have been foolish to do so. So if there's high profit potential, then new companies would want to get in. If there's not a lot of money to be made, then there's not an incentive, no matter how high the barriers to entry might be. And then, as I mentioned before, we look at the barriers to entry. And this is probably the main concern. The barriers to entry to get into window washing are extremely low. The barriers to get into the airline business are extremely high. The barriers to entry keep even motivated new entrants from successfully starting their companies and entering your industry. If you are established in an industry with high barriers to entry, you are protected by those barriers. That's a good thing for your own profit potential. Now let's talk about the threat of substitute products. Your product or service provides or solves a need or solves a problem for your customers. Thirsty people want something to drink. People with dirty houses want clean houses. People who want to move around buy cars and insurance and gasoline. Each of these examples shows a problem that people have and a solution that is provided by companies. But with each of these, there are substitutes or alternatives from outside the industry that could solve the same problem that people have. If you're in the soft drink industry, you sell soda. Customers buying a root beer that is a different brand from the root beer that you provide are not buying a substitute. They're buying a competing product. It's 99.99% the same thing. It's not a substitute. It's basically the same thing, just from a different company. However, a thirsty person who drinks a glass of milk is buying from a different industry. The dairy industry is completely different from the soft drink industry. Or maybe they're buying from other industries as well. In fact, they could be drinking tap water. Well, that doesn't come from the dairy industry or from the soda industry. That comes from the local utilities. And that is the industry that they're buying from if they want a drink of water out of the tap. In all of these examples, the problem is a person is thirsty, but there are different ways and different industries that can solve that problem. Customers with dirty houses could hire someone to clean those houses. They also could clean it themselves. That is a substitute. Do it yourself is a substitute for what people may pay companies to do. Another example or another substitute for a cleaning company could be a cleaning robot. Now, before you think I'm getting a little too futuristic here, how many people do you know with a Roomba or a robotic vacuum? Maybe it doesn't clean everything, but it can clean some things. And so these substitutes start to come in and take away from the work that cleaning companies could do. I also mentioned automobiles and that there are some things that go along with automobiles, but there are many substitutes for driving cars to get around. How do you get around? Some people walk or ride a bike if they're going somewhere local. Maybe you take a train or a plane or a subway if you're in a large city. All of these are substitutes for driving a car. Going on a walk versus going or flying in a plane are very different, but every one of those does overlap with the use of a vehicle or of an automobile. Even the automobile itself was once a substitute for a horse and buggy, and the industry, well, that industry basically died as a new industry came and replaced it. The horse and buggy industry was replaced by a substitute. The threat of substitutes can be particularly strong when switching costs are low, when it's easy for customers to switch from one product to another. I can easily just open a different fridge at the store and buy milk instead of soda. That's a very low switching cost. The threat of substitutes is also low when the price of the substitute is significantly lower. It costs me almost nothing to fill up a glass of water out of the tap compared to a bottle from Dasani or from an even higher priced water bottling service. To reduce the threat of substitutes, you can focus on providing great quality, lower prices, better branding, which comes from marketing and things like that, and better service. All of these things would give customers a reason to not go for the substitute, but instead to go with you. The last of the 5 forces that we're going to talk about here is rivalry among competing firms. Now, this is a huge topic. It deserves a whole playlist of its own, which is coming, but I want to take rivalry and talk about it a little bit right here. Rivalry between and among competitors gets stronger when they start losing customers to each other, when the decisions or the successes of one company start to influence negatively the other companies within the industry. Rivals compete with each other along a lot of different dimensions. Maybe they compete by trying to get the highest quality through innovation. Maybe they try to compete by having the lowest price for a product that customers want to buy. They may compete by trying to provide the best service, and you'll actually see companies that is what they're marketing, what they're trying to sell. And then, of course, marketing itself is another dimension in which competitors try to compete to convince customers to come to their company as opposed to their rivals. I think Wendy's is one of the best examples of using unique and creative marketing to try and convince people to not go to McDonald's and to go to Wendy's instead. A lot of companies come up with different ways to try and convince customers to come, and that builds and strengthens the rivalry. Rivalry among competitors intensifies or gets stronger when there are many or pretty well balanced competitors within an industry. It also gets stronger when the industry is growing slowly or not at all, or even if the industry itself is struggling, because companies are fighting even harder for the customers that are available. Rivalry gets stronger when fixed costs are high. An example in this is computer memory manufacturing. After you spent billions of dollars building that manufacturing facility, you keep it running. Even if you're not doing well, it's often better to run and get some revenue out of it rather than none. And so everybody keeps just producing, and that rivalry really intensifies. Rivalry also gets stronger when it's difficult to differentiate between one product and another, or when the switching costs are very low. And finally, rivalry gets strong when strategic stakes are high. If failure means that your company is going to go bankrupt, you're going to get desperate. You're going to work extra hard, and your rivals are going to do the same. And so they compete harder and harder when the strategic stakes are high. To improve your ability to compete with your rivals, it's important to learn what you can about them. This is called competitor intelligence. And there's a lot that you can learn about your competitors. I used to work in a Fortune 500 company where my job was largely to watch what our competitors were doing. Specifically, I watched their financial statements, I watched their press releases, I paid attention to all of those things so that we would know how we compared to them. We knew our strengths and our weaknesses relative to our competitors. There are a lot of sources of great information that you can get on your competitors. These include press releases, news reports, financial releases, product developments or product announcements, and many more. You can pay attention to a lot of this simply by watching online. You could also go in and visit your competitors. A lot of large retailers go and they'll have teams that go and visit their competitors, walk around their stores, and learn what they can. Of course, you don't want to do anything under false pretense, but it's perfectly fine to go and visit your competitor and learn about them. Pay attention to your competitors' strengths and weaknesses, assumptions and strategies. You can adjust and fine-tune and improve your own strategy based on what they are doing so that you can compete with them. So now that we've talked about each of the 5 forces, we're going to look at what would make particular industries attractive, or really that means that they have high profit potential for the company that is doing the analysis, or the company for which you're doing the analysis. So if an industry has high entry barriers, meaning it's difficult to get new competitors, that's good. If rivalry is low, if there are few substitutes, or if the buyers and the suppliers have low bargaining power, all of these things would make for an attractive industry where a company in that industry would be able to make a lot of money. We also will see that some industries are not attractive, or really that means that there's not a lot of potential to make money over the long term in those industries. So if there are low entry barriers, that means it's easy for new competitors to come in and take your market share. If rivalry is high, then you're competing, you're spending a lot of money on marketing, you're lowering your price, you're investing in R&D. It's hard to make money in that situation. If there are a lot of substitutes, that is not an attractive thing, or if your suppliers and buyers have high bargaining power. It's just going to be difficult to make money when you have all of these forces not in your favor. As an example here, we could talk about the cell phone industry, particularly looking at Apple and Motorola. With Apple, we can see that there are high entry barriers. It's hard to get into the industry. Rivalry is pretty low because most of their customers are very loyal, and therefore they're not really losing their customers to rivals very often. There aren't good substitutes available for cell phones. There are other providers, but not good substitutes. Suppliers have pretty low bargaining power because of the size and financial strength of Apple, and buyers have very low bargaining power as well. When was the last time that you had a lower price on a phone? You keep paying more for your subsequent iPhones because they are in such a strong bargaining position. They keep raising their prices, and you, the buyer, can't do much about it. We could also look here at Motorola. Well, there's still high entry barriers to get into the cell phone industry. It's not an easy industry to get into. You need a lot of capital and knowledge. Rivalry is pretty high for Motorola because Motorola customers could just as easily go to Samsung or Apple or others. The substitutes are still fairly low, but the suppliers will have more bargaining power with Motorola than they do with Apple, simply because Motorola is not as strong or not as big. They're not buying quite as much. And then buyers have a lot more bargaining power relative to Motorola than they do with Apple, because those customers could very easily switch to another supplier and probably not feel like they had lost much. The threat is higher to Motorola, and so you'll see that because fewer of these are in the favor of Motorola, it's going to be harder for them to make a profit. And certainly that does play out in the financial results between these two companies. Porter's 5 forces have a strong influence on the profit potential of a company within an industry. It's important to understand how each of these forces within the industry, or that affect the industry, specifically affect that company. This may take some time. This is a bigger question than I may often pose, but I want you to analyze each of the 5 forces for your company so that you can determine whether this is an attractive or a high profit potential industry, a low profit potential industry, or maybe somewhere in between. By understanding this, you can then adjust your strategy as necessary to improve your situation. In his 1979 publication introducing the 5 forces, Michael Porter gave some advice or some suggestions on how to improve the situation for your company relative to each of these 5 forces. To neutralize supplier power, standardize what you buy so that you can find other suppliers if necessary. This strengthens your bargaining power relative to suppliers. To neutralize buyer power, expand or improve services so that your offering is better than your rival's offering, so that your buyers are going to keep coming back to you. To neutralize rivalry, invest in making your own products different or better, and that could be by providing a lower price so customers come, or higher quality so that your customers will still want your product or service. To scare off new entrants, increase the cost of competing. Invest in research and development so that you're more innovative, so it's harder to get in and compete. Or you may increase your economies of scale so that it's more expensive for new entrants to come in and compete and actually be cost effective. Finally, to limit the threat of substitutes, offer better value through convenience. Soft drinks actually did this with vending machines. Their products are higher than some of the substitutes, but the soft drinks were more convenient. Thanks for joining today. This is one of the most critical components or areas for you to understand in business strategy for your company, for your future company, so that you can come up with strategies that fit your industry. I hope you liked the video. Stick around for more because we've got more great content coming. Have a great day.